Does being involved in a major political party erode your own personal freedom of conscience when it comes to matters of policy, at least in Parliament? It absolutely does. But I think that is a good thing. And that's my take from the controversial coach, Chucky. Let's pretend it up. I was going to start again. When people put in their applications to the Buckholden Academy, I get them to answer a question which goes, what do you feel is the biggest barrier that you need to overcome if you are going to enter Parliament? And something that people say is, or at least a couple of people have said, is that I don't know if I'm able to represent my local electorate very well if I am bound by caucus solidarity, because effectively it's outsourcing decision-making to a group that isn't my local electorate. I'm instead going to argue that it's because of caucus solidarity that you are able to actually represent your local electorate. Not an in spite of, I think it's a because of. Now, quick history lesson, if you don't know the history behind how we got caucus solidarity. Back in the 1890s, the Labor Party in New South Wales was split between two groups. There was the group called the Pledged Labor Candidates and another group called the Non-Pledged Labor Candidates. Have a guess which one stuck around in the party. It was the Pledged candidates. So the Non-Pledged candidates were people like Joseph Cook, who actually ends up becoming a Liberal Prime Minister later on, who said, look, I don't want to be bound by caucus solidarity. I'm a Labor guy, but I don't want to be bound by any group when it comes to decision making in Parliament. I will make the decisions that I think are appropriate to make in Parliament. And sure enough, those non-pledged candidates, they ended up leaving, and it was only the pledged candidates that remain. But have a guess who had influence in the 1890s? It was the Labor Party, because they were a consistent and reliable voting bloc that could be courted. The Free Traders and the Protectionists were just constantly breaking fellowship with each other because they couldn't get themselves organised and bound to a singular policy framework that was actually disciplined. And I think it's because of caucus solidarity that you are actually able to affect change and implement change, because you are able to lobby to an actual locus of control that can create long-term change and has enough stability that it can be trusted to actually enact change in Parliament. So, we have tried pledge versus non-pledge, and it was the pledged who were far more effective. The Liberal Party learnt this initially. They took pride in the fact that they didn't exercise, party room solidarity, but then they realized, we are so ineffective if we don't have some form of discipline. And so, bar a couple of things like conscience votes on social issues like abortion, the Liberal Party adopts the singular party room. Now, one of the things I think is a big misconception is people thinking that your vote in Parliament is your only way of actually exerting influence, and that's what your sole job description is. I don't agree with that. And so you might notice in my Mr. M videos, I've never used They Vote For You, not because I think it's a useless, I don't think it's a useless tool at all, but it's a couple of issues I have with it. The first one is that I think it's far more appropriate to use on independents than it is to use on people in major parties, because they are bound by the solidarity of their major party. They might have misgivings about it, but they have personally cast that aside to keep the direction of the party and to toe the party line. So I think it's more appropriate to use on independents than it is on people in a major party. Secondly, also, it's the framing of a lot of things. Like, they voted against wage increases. Well, what if the bill that had wage increase actually had a bunch of other poison pills that were unpalatable and couldn't be included as part of the bill? I don't think it's a perfect way. I don't think it's a useless tool, don't get me wrong, but I don't think it's necessarily the fairest to use on people in a major party. And that's because in a major party, what they figured out, this is going back to the 1890s, was that if you move the free dialogue just one rung forward before Parliament, you can have it in caucus instead. Caucus is so hostile. Like, they are, slings and arrows are flying at each other in caucus, and in Labor history, there's been punch-ons in caucus. That's how heated it's got. That's the real debate. And then once a majority has spoken, and once they figured out what the majority position is, the matter is settled, and they vote as a unified bloc in Parliament, and anyone who doesn't vote as the unified bloc gets expelled from the party. So, that has moved the locus of control just forward into one particular rung. And so, if you are concerned about not being able to exercise your judgment, you can exercise your judgment. You absolutely can make the case. Ed Husick does it all the time. You can exercise your judgment. You can make the case, like he's making the case as to why Labor should adopt the gas tax. I don't agree with him. I've made that point before. But he is making that case. But where is he making that case? He's, using a little bit of public pressure to try and twist the arm of Albo a bit. Also, there's multiple ways you can interpret it. One way of interpreting it is putting pressure on the Labor Party. Another way of interpreting it is shoring up a power base that exists outside of the Labor Party. Another way of interpreting it is that Albo has given him the green light to have someone on the inside saying, yeah, I'm pro the gas tax, so that Labor can play both sides. I don't know. I don't have the inside scoop. Multiple ways you can interpret that situation. The point being, he is not making that case in Parliament. He is not voting for the gas tax in Parliament. He's voting against it. And he's copped a lot of criticism from people that are like, you should just vote in line with your conscience. We've tried that so many times in human history. It just leads to 10,000 votes of no confidence against each other in Parliament. It doesn't work. There's no stability for the government. It breaks down entirely. It's not. It sounds nice on a micro level, but if you get it on a macro level, you get America. Like, you think, like, you've watched like House of Cards or anything, they're always talking about whips because they need their whips to get people to vote in line. And whips are so much more important in America because party discipline is so much weaker, and you sort of like key Democrats voting, like you get people voting against their own parties all the time. We don't get that in Australia. I think that's a much better system in Australia. But you are able to actually make the case, as many a Labor Party person has, in caucus. The other thing as well is that the most powerful people in Labor history have re-steered the ship of the party. They haven't left the party, they've re-steered the ship. We think of Gough Whitlam and we think of Paul Keating. Keating went to the National Labor Conference I can't remember, was it 83 or 84? I can't remember which year it was, where he basically made the case for allowing foreign banks into Australia. This was really unpopular in the Labor Party at the time. The left of the Labor Party opposed him, but he made that case and was successful in making that case. And he changed the policy platform at the National Labor Conference. Gough Whitlam, you might remember the case, or you might have heard of the case of the 36 faceless men. Basically, when Whitlam was deputy leader to Arthur Colwell, there was a National Labor Conference in a hotel room in Canberra, and they were deciding what the policy platform was going to be. Menzies had a field day with this because Menzies like, look, Whitlam and Colwell don't even get invited to their own policy platform. They're not even at the table when they're deciding what the policy platform is. It's just these faceless men in the Labor Party that are deciding it, and then Whitlam and Colwell have to go along with it. Whitlam kind of agreed with Menzies. He's like, we need to have parliamentarians need to be at this conference, and then B, we need to make it bigger and more open and transparent. And he fought his own Labor Party on that, and he won. Gough Whitlam, he fought the Victorian left. He tried to make them much more accommodating towards the Catholic right in Victoria, and he won that battle. There's the very famous "Only the impotent are pure." Gough Whitlam never broke fellowship with the Labor Party. There was a moment where he might have, when Colwell tried so hard to get him expelled from the party, but that was more a revenge tack against Colwell. It wasn't anything to do with the broader party itself. These very effective politicians that enacted change over a long period of time, they didn't do it from outside the party. This is Ed Husick's point. He's like, I'm not going to break fellowship with the party because then I lose my ability to actually enact change and affect change. The other thing as well is that your parliamentary vote isn't the only thing that matters. When Jim Chalmers is like working through the budget, people get consulted. If you are part of a major party that is in government at the time, you are going to get consulted around what might work for your local electorate and what the concerns are for your local electorate. That is your chance to lobby the government and to actually do so from a position of power rather than just shouting into a vacuum. So really, when it comes to actually enacting change and affecting change and representing your local electorate and getting material outcomes for your local electorate, I don't think it's possible outside of an organized discipline framework. I think if you don't have that, you are just shouting. You're a social media influencer, right? The only influence that you have is to make speeches and to make statements and hope that those statements get enough traction that you can then put enough public pressure on the government to change its position. I think of Pocock. Pocock's probably the only one that I can think of that's been able to do this, or at least put enough pressure on Albo that he can deal a big political blow to Albo on the gas tax. Again, Pocock, he just, like, he would argue that he represents the locals of the ACT, and he's able to do that by not being bound by Parliament. His speeches have enough potency in Parliament that they make a splash, they make a wave. What I would say is that he doesn't need to be in Parliament to do any of that. Again, and you can see this is testament to all the influences out there that are pro-David Pocock, that are making a big splash, that are contributing to the national policy conversation with a degree of potency when it comes to the gas tax. They are doing this without needing to be in Parliament. Pocock doesn't need to be in Parliament to really do any of the stuff that he's doing right now. So to actually enact change, would be Ed Husick's point, to be involved with an organisation that can shape change, you need to have a binding disciplinary structure in place to make sure that it can move in a singular direction and actually do so with some degree of consistency. So what I would argue, if you have concerns, people like, you're just going to be bound by the party room, caucus is what people really think. Like, when people think of what Parliament should be, of like free debate, people discussing ideas and then voting in line with their conscience, that's what caucus is. Caucus, I mean, maybe you could argue that, like, to some extent, there's like factual loyalties at play that maybe make caucus not just a direct reflection on people's consciences or people's judgment. But even then you just move the conversation one rung forward to the factions. there is a conversation where there is a moment where free and open dialogue is allowed with people, and people can make the case quite openly as to what they think the policy should be. It just cannot be with their parliamentary vote. That is the one way they cannot communicate that desire. And so you can absolutely do it. You can lobby the government to take a different policy position in the caucus room or even amongst your own factions as well. Those are very legitimate forms of influence that do actually shape things and do make changes as well. So realistically, if like someone was to say you're not going to have any ability to exercise change, you can go caucus. That's my way of lobbying for the people. When it comes to budget time, I can do that. And if I'm not bound by it, then I'm just shouting into a vacuum and hoping that someone picks it up and that somehow, because of that, enough public pressure is put on the person. Now, when it comes to understanding like a major party and the machinery that works behind the major party, the ability to enact change is so strong. Like you think of guys like Graham Richardson that could basically bring national parks into existence quite easily. He understood how his party worked and knew how to get done. He knew how to get things done within the party. And what I would argue is that understanding your own party and being part of an organized framework and understanding that party is basically like being able to use Photoshop compared to Microsoft Paint. Like, I don't know, if you think Microsoft Paint, it can do the basics really well. And so you think about like an independent politician who can go to parliament, make speeches, give acknowledgement to local school that, did really well in cross country or whatever. They can do the basics of being in parliament. But the sophisticated bits that really shape a future and the important policies that shape a future over a 10, 20-year period that are very nuanced, sophisticated, deal with things like delicate international relations, they take place within the party room. And so understanding the channels to actually affect change in the party room are really important. And so Photoshop might be really overwhelming at first, but if you know how to use it, you can do so much more than what you can do on Microsoft Paint. So it is worth investing in a party to learn, or a party that's actually potent, to learn the machinery and the frameworks in place to actually enact that change. Because then you'll be able to affect far more change than if you were just shouting into a vacuum. If you don't know how the Labour Party works, or you have just some curiosity about it, the Buckholden Academy is a really easy place to learn about it. Not only do you get the whole history, but you have lots of people in there that can answer your questions. Again, I try and keep all the specifics out of it so that no one gets doxed or anything. But right here, there's people going, dumb question, can I just ask this basic question? People give a very clear answer that is easy to work with. So if you feel stupid and you feel like I don't know factions, I don't know unions, I don't really have any bearing or understanding of how the party works, it is really easy to join the Buckholden Academy. And in the Buckholden Academy, lots of helpful people that can answer all of your questions. So there are new spots opening up. So make sure to put an application in. We just went through our last intake recently as well. So the Discord is continuing to grow and continuing to be filled with even more helpful faces.